And we are live. It's another great day in Cribl TV. So happy to be here with Jackie. How are you doing, Jackie?
I am glad it's Friday. How are you?
Not bad. It's been a long week myself. So tell me, what you gonna do this weekend?
I have I don't know. In addition to Halloween, I had sick kids this week, so it has
No.
been chaos at my house. But I broke down and hired a personal assistant because I am just I'm not getting it all done. And so the same thing that we try to tell our customers, spend your resources where you get the highest ROI. So my house is cleaner than it's been in like months because
There you go.
my assistant went through it in one day. And this is the terrible thing about hiring an assistant is I'm like, damn. And one day she did what we had not been able to do in 6 months. So I may actually get to relax this weekend.
There you
What
go.
about you?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure either. I mean, just going back to we have a housekeeper come clean the house. It's the best investment that I make because it keeps my wife from murdering me. And so I feel that, and I'm not talking figuratively murdered. I'm talking, buried in the backyard murdered. And
Oh
so
yeah.
having a clean house
Yeah.
makes my wife happy and it keeps me alive. So I find that to be a good investment.
Yeah, I've had a house cleaner since I was 20, and my first adult roommate was like, "You're a slob, so either get a maid or move out."
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
And then my
Oh
husband and I
yeah.
got married, and I was like, "Oh no, you're messy too." And so it's same thing. It keeps us from getting divorced, and it's not. I think it's even worse if one person's clean and one person's messy. Luckily, we're both messy, so it's just like this is a necessity in our house.
There you go. Yeah, in terms of this weekend, we got, my daughter's going to have some friends over. They're going to have a good time. I plan on watching a lot of football. I'm going to be yelling at the TV over fantasy football on Sunday. So pretty much a standard weekend.
That's
So,
awesome.
so let's get to the subject of the day. So an indictment dropped from the SEC against SolarWinds and its CISO, charging them with criminal charges for fraud. I was blown away because I think this is a high watermark in the industry in terms of accountability. What do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there were a lot of conversations about this on our team this week, just because, like, kind of where the charges fell and where they didn't, the content of the charges, some of the stuff that was laid out in the indictment is just
Wild.
kind of mind blowing. Yeah, and so I think it's really interesting between this and the new SEC rule. It seems like it's crazy because we have all these standards and these policies and these best practices, and like you have these government organizations that set up all these like guidelines,
Sure.
but when companies really actually start to do something is when they're worried about getting sued or losing money, right?
Or going to jail. So now it's
Yeah,
like, you know what?
yeah,
If I'm going to be a dumbass, I'm going to go to jail. Maybe that's my downside. So maybe let's do better.
yeah. So I think hitting companies in the wallet and letting executives know that you'll be held personally liable for this stuff is important. We also saw, not that it's related, but the Sam Bankman-Fried or whatever, he was convicted on all of his charges this week as well. So it's been
Yes, I
a,
mean,
a
and
heck of a
hopefully not the
week.
first of the crypto bros that are going to go to jail, because
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, the amount of fraud and grift. I love the story from some of the VCs about how excited they were, and only to find out that he's playing League of Legends, during the entire call. I'm just like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's coming from Wall Street, and in reading some of the stuff about how those assets were commingled and things like
Yes.
that. And I work for Fidelity, so I worked for like one of the really, really conservative Wall Street companies where it's like everything was done on the most conservative
Oh,
interpretation of
exactly.
things.
You
So
only had a little bit of compliance audit. You only just a little bit.
yeah, yeah, and so it's interesting, right?
Sure.
But I think it makes me, while it's bad, it's bad because you read these and you're like, dang, it looks like things are worse at some companies than you realize they are.
Right.
It's also probably going to be what helps push this change along a little bit faster.
Yeah, and I think and it's unfortunate that so oftentimes security is ignored or minimized because it's seen as a cost center, or you're seen as we have
Mhm.
nothing anyone wants to steal. So why should we be so focused on security? And
Yeah.
I like that the government is going to give them a reason to care that, if you're traded, you're publicly traded, you have a certain fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders that you need to be responsible. And also, I'd like to think you have a fiduciary responsibility to your customers that you
Yeah.
need to be responsible as well.
Yeah, and a lot of this comes down to just a cultural thing within companies. And I saw this a lot on Wall Street as well, because, again, so I work for Fidelity and I worked for them through the financial crisis. And it's really interesting where you would see the banks and brokers where compliance was the enemy
Right.
and compliance was there to prevent things and all of that. Whereas at Fidelity, it was like compliance is your best friend.
Right.
Compliance is there to cover your ass, to keep you out of jail, to keep you from, like they are your best friend. And that's how I never saw them as the enemy. And so, like, same thing in security. There are some companies where it's like security is your friend. Security is there to help you build things the right way the first time, to help you put things in place
Right.
correctly, to save your ass. And I think because we haven't seen a lot of prosecutions over cybersecurity, because we haven't seen a lot of, up until now with the new SEC disclosures, we didn't really realize what the actual monetary impact of some of these things were. It wasn't always clear what security was there to save you from. So hopefully now that it's becoming more clear, like what appropriate security is actually saving you from, which is like, I don't know, jail time.
Yeah.
Maybe that culture will change, right?
Yeah, I think that would have been helpful for Wall Street too. If you're going to do really dumb things and incentivize super dumb things, maybe a little jail's good for you too. But yeah, I mean, you think about during the things that caused the crisis in 2008, especially about how bonds were managed and things like that. That's a good example, but unfortunately, I think that's more aspirational than something that'll actually happen.
Yeah, and it's quick. It's interesting to see how quickly things can change at a company. I went to SVB after I left Fidelity,
Oh
and
boy.
yeah, and when I worked at SVB, I literally spent all day helping
Mhm.
write investment policies for CFOs that would protect them from, and we were telling them from the stupid things these other banks did during the
Right.
financial crisis, that wasn't it so dumb that these banks did these crazy things with these assets. And then, to read that the same thing happened, and it's like, it's, it goes to show that when it comes to security, regulatory, compliance, things like that, like, it's not a set it and forget it. It's an ongoing, it has to be baked into your culture. It has to be baked into everything that you do at every level of the organization, or you do run the risk that you make assumptions. And then we were just talking before this about how the other thing is a lot of enterprises, like, part of what kept coming up in the SolarWinds thing is like, oh, we didn't think we were that big of a target. We
Right.
didn't know. We didn't.
Yep.
And it's like a lot of companies don't understand either the value of their data as an asset
Yep.
or the value of their data as a liability, and the position that they're at within the supply chain and within customers' architecture to really understand what level of a target they are, which is interesting.
Exactly. I think that's even more so now that you have nation states getting involved, because nation
Yeah.
states aren't just looking to steal money; they're looking for other things as well. And I
Yeah.
think SolarWinds is a prime example, because you're sitting in the architecture where you literally have access to every network. You've now breached the zero trust policy is breached because we have to go through monitoring. And so it's such a key place. And I honestly, they never considered that a nation state actor would get involved with an entirely different set of incentives. And I think that
Yeah.
any company that is deploying software into a customer environment has to be very aware of what that software could be used for. And it could have nothing to do with stealing money. It could have to do something else. And that's just something I guarantee you they didn't even consider that. We talk about APT, advanced persistent, like this is the extra advanced persistent threat that it just
Yeah.
never even thought about.
Well, yeah, one of the fallouts from the Johnson Controls hack. So, right. So, one of the recent disclosures is that
Sure.
Johnson Controls was hacked, and it's like, all right, no big deal. They're an HVAC company. Well, number one, they're a big component in the supply chain for data centers. So, that could be
Exactly.
disruptive.
Huge
But
issue.
number two, they have schematics for a lot of government agencies, military buildings, all of these things, because they install HVAC and components in these buildings.
Right.
So, you think, oh, who cares? It's an air conditioning. It's a big freaking deal, right? The FBI, I think it was the FBI was saying that Langley, or no, CIA was saying that they potentially had blueprints and schematics for Langley, which was a
Oh,
big
I'm
deal.
sure. But think about all the critical infrastructure. Think about your telecom systems, your water, energy. I mean, they have the controls for all those different things. And so, when you're playing in the nation state level, it's a totally different set of calculations.
Yeah, yeah, and even it's interesting because it's hacking tactics like we're hacking people, not systems, right? So
Always.
we're very rarely looking for 0 days, and it's mostly social engineering and things like that. And so I was talking with the Enterprise Security Weekly guys yesterday about how the types of data that your organization holds that you might not have thought had any value at all previously are actually kind of getting more important. So, for example, like anecdotal information about your employees, what their children's names are, what their pets' names are. In Slack, I can find out a lot of information about somebody, who their manager is, all those types of things. And like that information didn't used to seem high value, but if I can use that with a support team or something
Right.
like that to do a really sophisticated social engineering attack, that like it's all data is critical now. And so I think we're going to really have to start changing the way we think about what data is more important to protect than others, because the way data is being used, and it makes sense, right? It's this cat and mouse game where attackers say, all right, well, if you build a wall around this kind of data, this data is really easy to access. Can we weaponize it? And
Exactly.
so it's
It's
crappy to say, but it's all important.
exactly. And Slack, and this is something that before a few years ago, things like Slack have so much information, and especially when you start adding on applications, you're now linking into other applications. You think about you like support. So here's this password in order to log into something. So getting in, and these are internet accessible tools. So now
Yeah.
anyone on the internet has potential to get at all the information you need to compromise you. And so it's a risk calculation exponentially grows.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unfortunate, but we see like even some of the largest companies in the world are having these issues where like there was a Microsoft tried to share some machine learning models, and they accidentally
Sure.
shared a repository with machine backups in
Right.
it.
It's
And so it's I think this demonstrates that the way that we're going about thinking about securing this data is wrong. And I don't know. I hate to think about people going to jail, but you
I,
got to start somewhere. And for too
exactly.
long, we've let people cause a lot of damage to a lot of different people and businesses, and not held people accountable.
Exactly. And I think that that's a classic example, especially where, I mean, the evidence in the indictment is this has been going on for years. It was not a secret about the problems, and they were just ignored. And
Yeah,
how long was the password? What password 123 on their FTP server? I mean, those are the kind of things. It's just making it too easy, and you know about it, and especially
yeah.
when you're the one signing the 8K. I mean, that's you're on the hook for that.
Yeah, and I would assume things have changed in the last 12 years, 15 years. But when I worked at a mechanical contractor years ago,
Hmm.
I actually helped my husband start one, and you would go into a building, and again, their air conditioning system, which
Sure.
is fully connected to their network, lots of times with ports opened with very little control over them. Admin.
I mean, I believe this
Every
is true.
time, every time.
Yeah. But wasn't Target compromised over a VPN from their HVAC provider or something like that? I mean, and so
Yep.
and and that's where that network segmentation is so important. And this is where hygiene, being secure by default. I heard someone say I thought was really good, because that way, if your HVAC provider is compromised, they can't get out of what they need to get to, which I would hope would be pretty small, but their ability
Yeah.
to laterally move just wouldn't be there. And
Yeah.
but again, it goes back to thinking, setup, mindset, culture, buy-in, and it's just too easy. It's just too easy to ignore it.
Yeah. I think you had some screenshots because you plucked some of the juicier
Oh yeah,
tidbits out
here's
of
my favorite. Yeah, this is my favorite. So this is right in 2020. It got asked, do we have an SDLC process for enforcing or Orion improvement, program server, and we should do it at ASAP. And the guy's like, nope, it's not part of the SDLC. It's just literally part of the policy that it's not part of the SDLC.
Yeah. And again, SDL here, we're talking about software development lifecycle, right?
Right.
So this whole concept of, do we know what's installed in our environment? Do we have policies about how long things get to exist there? Do
Right.
we have, yeah, and and this is something that, and it's interesting, this is in 2020, when we catapulted into remote work, many enterprises
Mm.
were not really prepared for what that was going to mean, for the fact that employees would just start installing free software because it helped them do their job remotely better. And we have a lot of enterprises now that are in this really precarious position of, we've installed a whole bunch of crap on a whole bunch of different
Right.
endpoints and servers and things like that. A lot of times people don't even know what they have installed. They don't, they have no way of managing it. And there's no policy to say, like, hey, this piece of software needs to be reviewed every this many quarters or years or whatever it is, to make sure that it's still secure for our environment. And remote work did more, I think, to make that problem worse than just about anything else.
Yeah, Frank McGovern on the X site, formerly known as Twitter, had a really great observation that security begins and ends with identity. And
Mhm.
that includes not only the who but also asset. Just
Yeah.
talking about, because if you can't defend it if you don't know what's there, you can't defend it if you don't know who is there. And if there is a problem, you can't respond if you don't know the who and the what as well. And so it's crippling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the issue is that a lot of the innovation and development happens around like point problems. And so, like, let's solve these points of issue here,
Right.
so, and it's not, there isn't a great, because this is the same question that came up in a meeting I had yesterday. It's like, okay, if we admit that we have tons of tech debt and that the way we're doing things is not great, what do you do?
Right.
Like, is it a rip everything out and replace it? And like, is it a, and for most enterprises, they have to be online 24 hours a day, right? And a decent majority of their stack can't be upgraded at the same time. So there has to be a process for, these are the new policies for everything going forward. And this is, our goal is in the next 36 months, we're going to address everything backwards. And this is,
Right.
chunk it up. And it's not, I think humans in general, when it comes to complex problems, want a unilateral solution. And if you can't give them a unilateral solution, we don't do well with incremental solutions
Exactly.
generally, and so it's hard. So because you have to really chunk this stuff up into kind of sprints, and
Yep.
projects, and they always take longer than expected. And but that's what I see as being the solution. Like what do you what do you think
Sure.
is the solution
Well,
to this?
it's the only solution. I remember my wife's always not exactly understood what I do, and I would say, "Hey, so the analogy is we're changing the transmission on the bus while the bus is still going down the highway at 60 miles an hour, and that's what
Yeah.
makes it hard. Is how do you keep moving forward and remediate your tech debt, always getting better? And I dare say that if SolarWinds in June of 2020 had a, hey, you know what, this is not good. We need to fix this, and they had put in a program to fix it, that they wouldn't be held to this level of accountability, because
Yeah.
they would recognize it. They're moving forward. They're doing something about it, which I think is completely reasonable. But the
Yeah.
failure to even recognize it and do anything about it, that's the problem.
Yeah, yeah, and one of the questions that came up amongst our team when the charges were released was, well, why wasn't the CEO charged? Why was the CISO charged and the enterprise itself was charged, but why wasn't the CEO charged? And I think the answer to that would vary from company to company, because the CISO wasn't charged because something went wrong, right? Like
Right.
that's just the nature of cyber war and the technology today. The CISO was charged because he knew in detail what was wrong
Yep.
and actively took steps to withhold information, make things look better than they were, and not fix things. And I think if he had told if the CEO had been fully aware of what was going on and just chose not to do anything about it, then that might be a different story. But in this case, I mean, the fault is really in understanding the problem and doing nothing about it.
Exactly. So I'm just sharing from the indictment the point that addresses exactly what you're talking about, that it was his, as an officer in the company, that was his role. That was his head of the
Mhm.
InfoSec group. He was also the chief cybersecurity expert. He also owned audit and compliance, and he signed the 8K. And so that's what put him solely on the hook. Now, if there's evidence, and the thing is, if I'm his defense attorney, I'm throwing everybody under the bus. That, we're it's like, hey, we have the approval of the board, and the board knew about it, and they're going to get. Why aren't they getting charged? Why is the CEO getting charged? But
Yeah.
but the indictment, it specifically addressed this, and this is an example of from a structure, and this is where you mentioned, like, the SEC, is that the board should have a component and a role in this, where the part of the board is designated as, because typically boards aren't going to know anything about this, but they should have their own independent expert to give them independent advice about what's your role. But until there's liability and accountability for boards, they're not I don't think they're going to do it.
Well, and because boards are generally comprised of pretty wealthy, influential
Right.
people, they were able to lobby to get that provision taken out of the SEC rules that were just put in place, because there
Exactly.
was going to be a requirement for cybersecurity expertise at the board level. And I think and here's the thing though, is that like, at what point do people just stop wanting to be CISOs? At what Because from my understanding is personal liability insurance has also gotten significantly more expensive at the CISO level, and I think this indictment is probably going to make that even more the case.
Yeah.
So at what point do people just say, you know what? It's too much. It's too much liability. It's too much risk. It's too much, I because there has to be a balance here, right? And then I don't know. Oh goodness, I wish there were easy answers to this, but I guess if there were, we wouldn't be in this
There's not.
predicament, right?
Yeah, I think from a corporate, like from a corporate governance structure, this is an example where, like, if I'm a CISO, I'm going in, and it's not my personal insurance; the company is paying for my insurance. And also, have you ever heard of emissions and disclosures insurance?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
so you'd be covered under that, because right now most aren't, as far as I know. And also, I'm insisting that if I'm the CISO, I am going to fully disclose to the board, because that way, by full disclosure to the board, they're on the hook too. And
Yeah.
so I think, and that's where, from a structure standpoint, you can cover yourself from liability. You can cover yourself by, it's not just me hiding this stuff. And
Yeah.
so it creates more of an incentive to do the right thing, to acknowledge. But you're right though. I mean, especially small, medium companies. If I'm a CISO, I'm like, hell no, I'm not signing up for this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the direct access to the board is important. Because a lot of times I think there's this misconception in a lot of companies that like the CEO is the king. And it should, at least in a company that's organized where there's a balance of power, that shouldn't be the case,
Right.
right? And that like uh, there should be a direct line for business execution, which is CEO, right? Then there's other division of responsibilities, but the interesting thing is there's actually not really any regulation over that as well, like
Not at all.
who has to be an officer, who
Right.
has to be, there you can pretty much organize your executive team and your board any way you want it, and a lot of CEOs have been able to structure it so that they have a massive amount of control both over the corporation in general as well as the board. So we may need to also revisit whether there should be predetermined roles, in that your company has to have an officer who takes liability for security and compliance,
Exactly.
things like that.
And I think another thing from a governance standpoint is the GRC function should not be under the CISO or the CIO. Because I see that is a big, big place where there's supposed to be that warning that something's wrong. But if they're under the leadership of someone who wants to make sure that no one knows something is wrong, then that makes it too easy. And so
Yeah,
there has to be,
segregation of duties.
yeah, exactly. So like a chief risk officer, someone like that. So the GRC functions under them, or the legal or general counsel or something. Even though I got to say, letting lawyers run your business is a mistake. And so, maybe put your GRC function under somebody else. But the point is, you got to separate the watchdogs from the people who could be the bad actors.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that,
Yeah,
especially coming from kind of a conservative, compliance-heavy industry is kind of my basis for existing in the world is that I think, we having very clear separation of duties and reporting lines and also creating mandatory reporting conditions, like
right.
that's sometimes it's not, and this is becoming more clear for public companies because the SEC, along with the disclosure rules for cybersecurity, also established, you have to have guidelines for determining materiality. There's a whole bunch of other requirements, but that's not required of unregistered companies. And so we
Exactly.
need to have some type of parallel, at least guidelines for unregistered companies, because you can't expect a company to do things well if you don't outline for them what that even looks like. Like when I started it, nobody told me when I started a company and I would, like, here's what the ideal corporate structure looks like.
Right.
Here's how to find a good board. It's just not, it's the last thing that you learn. And I guess unless you get an MBA, but it's just not, it's not something people teach you. And it's like, so if we had better policies and practices and procedures in place for founders, it would make it easier to do the right thing, and it would make it easier to prosecute people for not doing the right thing because it would be more clear that they knew what they were supposed to have done. Because
You know,
that's not clear right now.
yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing I think I'm glad you're bringing this up is that the SEC's reaches only if you're a registered company.
Right.
Lot of really big companies that are not publicly traded. And
Yeah.
so what do we do about them? How do we create, you know, sometimes I want to call it, I want to create the I give a shit. So how do you do that? And so
Yeah.
that's going to be that's a huge challenge. And also, but you still have to balance out the regulatory environment to be able to do business. And that's another big challenge. And because I mean, I remember I've been going over some of the recent SEC rules that have been proposed and also have been approved lately. They add a lot of overhead to the cost of doing business. And so I think
Yeah.
it's fair that you have to always keep paying attention to what makes sense, what are we going to do, how are we going to manage this, and find that middle ground. And then also what do you do about, of course, unregistered companies? That's a whole nother issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I really think that we need to, as a community in technology, figure out whether there should be some type of like free resource out there, or like,
Mhm.
there's in a lot of other industries, they've set up these kind of like nonprofit bodies where if you need help, if you need guidance, you can go and, like there isn't, you can't really call CISO right now and be like,
Right,
hey, can you come help me set up my networks in a secure manner?
right,
And so would that be expensive to fund? Yes. But what is the cost? Again, what is the liability cost on the other end? We look at the market value that's been lost in the market because of
yes,
cyber attacks this year. That is insane. And
right,
if we had taken a tenth of that and put it into creating better support for organizations who want to do the right thing, we wouldn't be in this position. So
right.
we really need to decide as a society that security is something that we want to invest in and spend money on, and that we want to support people in. Because that's the other thing is like we leave people out there on their own and expect them to just figure out what the right thing to do is.
Yeah, and too often that's going to be driven by security costs me money, and even if I get hacked, I'll still cost me less money than if I had good security. So we're just not going to do it.
Yeah, well, yeah, and if you don't build security into the business model from inception, it does become just a cost center, right?
Right.
Because if security is baked in from beginning, then your business model is built to function in a secure manner. And it's like we shouldn't allow businesses to develop where their business model doesn't include the appropriate investment in cybersecurity any more than we should let businesses develop where their business model doesn't include unemployment insurance or anything else like that. And so it's actually in business's best interest that we require they do these things from inception, because it will set them up to succeed from a security standpoint. And then security isn't just this unexpected expense thrown on top of things.
Totally. That's a really good point. So I guess I think it's important for we advocate, we talk, and hope. Sometimes I think we just got to hope for the best.
Yeah. And stay out of jail.
That's yeah. Above all, stay out of jail,
That's my goal. Stay out of jail.
or at least make sure I have really good insurance, so someone else is paying my lawyer bill.
Yeah. Yeah. Or be really well connected so I can go to the Martha Stewart jail.
There you go. That's too cool. Hey, but Jackie, this was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I think these are the kind of things that we all who work in this field need to talk about more, because I think it's imperative that we, admit our faults. If we see a problem, we put a plan to do something about it. I don't think anyone expects any company to solve all the problems in all the tech net overnight. That's just not possible. But it's important to understand it and do something about it, not just ignore it.
Right. And to help people solve problems and not just slap them on the wrist.
There you go. Hey, so you want to wrap it up?
Yes. Follow us on social media. Please follow Cribl. We're big on LinkedIn. I'm
20,000 plus.
honestly Jackie. Yeah, we just crossed 20,000 followers, so that's cool. You could be one of the cool kids.
I know you abandoned me on the bird site. You just left.
It was a no for me, dog.
Yeah, I have a hard time saying X. That's just a little bit something. But
well, and again, like when you stop being able to trust that a company is sufficiently investing in security to be able to protect your personal information on the back end of a platform, it's the same reason I don't have a TikTok account.
Yeah, you got it. I don't have one either. Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, I appreciate it. Please join us in the Cribl community. So cribl.io/community. I think we're like 6,500 strong in the Slack community. Also, social media, LinkedIn is especially great. Connect with the Cribl audience. We are here to help. We want to help. Check out our sandboxes at sandbox.cribl.io. And we look forward to engaging. We want to hear the good, the bad, the ugly. How can we help you solve your problems?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, have a great afternoon. Enjoy your weekend.
All right. Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care.